So interesting news on those booster shots, Saagar.
Yeah, so I mentioned some of this, a little bit of this news about FDA officials within the government who resigned. And it appeared that they had resigned over the Biden administration's what they saw as too speedy of an embrace of recommending that all Americans get a booster shot after 6 months. Well, they've now actually come out and specifically panned the Biden administration's policy. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. The experts who resigned there say, quote, the average person doesn't need a COVID-19 booster yet. So including the top 2 U.S. regulators from the FDA who left there. They published this in a scientific journal. Here's what they said. Even in populations with fairly high vaccination rates, the unvaccinated are still the majority drivers of transmission. However, and what they point to in The Lancet is that intense scientific debate about who needs the booster and when is not something that the U.S. had followed through specifically on before they kind of got ahead of their skis and recommended that all Americans go ahead and get a booster. Why does all of this matter? Public health number one, do you need a booster or not? And is that going to be part of one of the official government recommendations? Would that become part of vaccine mandates, vaccine passports, all that other nonsense? You know, in terms of like, oh, are we going to get the, like, are you going to be allowed to eat in New York City if you don't have your booster in 6 months? That's a big question, right? All of that, of course, comes into play, but really what it is that the messaging around this, or should I say the mess of the messaging around this, dramatically undermines confidence in vaccines. One of the things that you most common hear from anti-vaxxers or people who don't want to get the COVID shot is like, oh, little piggy, like lining up to get your 9th booster or whatever once a month. And then they'll also point to the fact that many people on the booster can't even really agree who needs one, what, where, does everybody need one? And then when you pair that back, it becomes and undermines confidence overall in the entire public health regime. I pointed that data out to you, Krystal, about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that every single day leading up to the pause in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine had seen an exponential increase. Now, look, obviously it was still early in the process, but the moment that vaccination appointments began to dip and never recovered critically was exactly after that pause over the blood clotting issue. It was such a dramatic mistake. And I think it's very much in the same thing where, you know, they got ahead of their skis. They wanted to make sure that they could, they're like, we want to project confidence over these rising Delta variants and more. But the actual science and specifically the scientists themselves within the FDA did not agree, resigned over the plan, now hitting back at them in the own pages of The Lancet, which is, you know, a medical journal of, you know, didn't exactly color itself in glory with the whole lab leak thing, but still within the public health community. That actually
tells you something.
That's right. But within the public health community who deeply respects all this stuff, this is a very serious shot across the bow at what they've done. You
know, I think it's dicey to get into the psychology of like, how are people going to interpret it? And is this going to fuel more vaccine resistance, et cetera, et cetera? All I want is to know whether the data justifies it.
I agree. Yeah.
And what it looks like. And what these scientists have also seemed to indicate is that the Biden administration made a decision here that was more political than based on data.
Yes.
Now, what they looked at that made them move in this direction, they say, of booster shots for the general population, not just the elderly, not just the immunocompromised. There are populations where it's pretty clear at this point they would benefit from a booster shot. But we're talking about for the general population here. There was data that came out of Israel where they saw for people who were 60 or older, they had better results if they received that booster shot. So that was what essentially they seized on to say, okay, well, we should encourage booster shots for the general population. But again, that's really just for people 60 and older. So again, that's not the entire population. And there just isn't much in the way of data supporting this otherwise. And in fact, we know that through, you know, 1 billion trials around the world at this point, that the vaccines continue to be very effective with regards to Delta variant when it comes to hospitalization and death, which are the big things that we ultimately care about here. So what these scientists are arguing is that is really 2 things. Number one, there's a risk that if you have rich countries like the US having booster shots when much of the developed world hasn't gotten their first shot. I saw a stat just this morning that I think it's like 20% of lower income countries around the world, only 20% of people in those nations have received the full vaccination. So there's a risk that you're taking away doses from people who really need them And if you're worried about new variants and all of that, that's a major issue that you have to look at from a global perspective. But the other thing that they're saying here is that there may be a better case to be made for altering, as new variants emerge, altering the vaccines to better match those new variants, just like the flu shot gets updated every single year to better match that strain of flu that is predominant in that year, that it might be better to wait until they make those updates rather than just giving everybody another booster of the same shots that have already been out there. We also know that there's been a financial incentive for Pfizer and Moderna.
They've been pushing this for a long time.
They've been pushing it, yeah. And we covered a New York Times article a while back that was like, Pfizer says, yes, everybody needs booster shots, but scientists aren't so sure.
Yep.
So they've got a profit motive that may be infecting some of this process as well. Again, look, I think it's dicey to get into the psychology, and it may be the case that people would genuinely benefit from a booster shot. But it seems pretty clear the data to back that up just isn't there yet, and that the Biden administration made more of a political decision than they did a follow the science decision.
We've seen a little bit of crumbs of this inside the bureaucracy. So this story back in September 4th really caught my eye. Let's put it up there on the screen. And it was health officials advised White House to scale back booster plan for now. This didn't and flew a little bit under the radar within the media, but it was a big story, which is that the top federal health officials inside the administration had actually told the White House to scale back the booster shot, saying that regulators needed more time to collect, review all the necessary data. And they made that pitch specifically to Jeff Zients, who's the White House pandemic coordinator. That came critically after President Biden had already come out with the booster plan. And I think it gets to exactly what you were saying, what the biggest problem with the White House, Fauci, and so much more. They move the goalposts specifically to try and calibrate where the public is. By doing that, they undermine science itself and public confidence in the entire thing. And so what has happened? Fauci used to say, oh, well, we need 70% of Americans to get a shot. Well, we're almost there, so now what? Is it okay? What's the problem? I'm talking specifically about adult Americans. And he even admitted in the past that he adjusts the level of where herd immunity needs to be based upon where he thinks Americans will
what do you think they'll accept?
He's like, well, it's 50. And then the next thing, it's like 90. And it's like, wait, what? And it's all because he's trying to calibrate via his appearances on the news. That is actually dramatically undermining the entire public health infrastructure. And specifically, this FDA story has made some of the media, I think, literally uncomfortable because, like I said, they embraced it. I immediately already saw these pro-vaccine, doctors that apparently live on MSNBC and more. They're like, you will not be considered fully vaccinated unless you've had your third shot. And once again, all of this comes back to inside of the administration itself, per what you're saying, is that when the data was never really clear.
Yeah.
And again, what we're saying is not you don't need a booster. If you're old, maybe. It looks like it was working out pretty well in Israel.
Right.
Same thing whenever it comes to immunocompromised people who talk to your doctor. That's the number one underlining thing that we would say. But recommending a policy for all Americans without having the requisite data there, and then having, again, the top scientists within the FDA resigning over this, and they're both on their way out in October and in November, then publicly signing on to a paper lambasting the administration itself. It's very bad. I mean, you can imagine what would happen on the Trump administration if something happened like that. They would lose their minds.
If this happened under Trump, you would know about it. You probably didn't
know
about it. If this happened under Trump, it would be leading the news cycle. You would know all about it. And look, that's fine, but the same thing should apply in this instance as well. There's a confusing, sort of conflicting message here that I think is part of the problem. Number one, and this is accurate, the vaccines offer very good protection.
Yes.
Even against Delta, right? Yes, breakthrough infections are a real phenomenon. We can attest to that personally.
It. Yes.
But
you didn't get sick. She didn't get sick.
I didn't get sick. Yeah. Worked for me, right? So, you are still less likely to get COVID at all if you have the vaccine. And you have the confidence of knowing that you're very unlikely to end up in the hospital. You're very unlikely to end up dead. That seems like a big deal. So on the one hand, you have the messaging, the vaccines work really, really well. And all the evidence that we have says that is in fact the case. But on the other hand, but you might need to still get a booster because they don't work that well. It's like, wait a second, I'm confused by this. And it may be the case, as in Israel, that for certain populations, it does make sense because they continue to be at risk. They need that after 8 months. You need that additional shot. That may well be the case. But it's what these scientists are arguing is that there just isn't data to support the necessity of a booster shot for the general population because, in fact, the initial doses of vaccine continue to be extremely effective against the Delta variant and all of the other variants that are out there. So that's good news. That's good news. And by the way, there's been a decline in new cases and hospitalizations. There are still places in the country that are really bad. But we also should talk about the fact that there is starting to be a small decline in Delta variant across the country. That's really good news, too.
California, actually, cases fell off a cliff yesterday, which was having big trouble with Delta. Look, we have no way of knowing exactly where we are within the curve. The UK obviously had a dramatic spike in Delta, and then it completely collapsed. So are we where the UK is? At the same time, temperatures are beginning to drop. I was in Maine recently. It's already cold up there. So, okay, what's going to happen? Are people going to begin to congregate inside? Are we going to see the November, December spikes that we saw? Again, this is speculation. I literally have no idea. But really what it comes down to, we need clear communication from the government. We need it to actually be backed by science, not expectations of where the public is or not. And we should require serious deliberation so that we can accomplish our number one goal, which is let's keep elderly and the most, compromised amongst us out of the hospital and not dead so that we can all go back and live our lives. And right now, I think we're actually in the best position to do that. I know that might be a controversial statement. We have a vaccine. It works. It will protect you from death. Generally, it will decrease the amount of infection that your chance of infection, both in getting it and in spreading it. So I don't really see what exactly the holdup is, but that I'm not in the government, so there we go.
Yeah. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.